Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about time consumption. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, what is the most time consuming aspect of software engineering projects? The most time consuming depends on the role that you have and sort of the system itself. If you, for example, have, which is my life basically these days, if you have a high integration system, almost everything you do in terms of time is making requests to other teams so that they can update their APIs or their processes or things like that. So it's like meetings, 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 meetings. If you want to change a number on a page, that might take months and 10 meetings because you need to align all the people that feel like there are all these factors, and then they have to plan, and then you have to it's politics. That is definitely the thing. If we talk, I mean, this is I mean, I'm belly aching a little bit here about this thing, but I mean, this is the normal for product owners and like you mean guys, you know, all those those story cards that make it into the backlog. That's usually the amount of work that goes into them. Well, depending on who you're dealing with, right? In some cases, at the very least, that is the sort of time it takes to create that card. We don't think about that so often, but who does? But apart from that, the most time-consuming aspect is usually, well, as the system grows, there's more and more process necessary in order to assure that the system is working at all times. And so there's a lot of time that goes into just, I mean, understanding how to build certain things. Then there's a lot of process that goes into time that goes into making sure that you've covered all the logical, like, I'm not saying testing, because I don't want to say that testing takes time, but the reality is that with the unit testing is not to blame for the fact that this takes time. The reality is that you could do the same thing without unit testing. Like, you can test your code and make sure that it works, but it's usually the case that there are so many unknowns and so many risk factors when you ship any type of software. It's actually very rare that you have a problem when you work that is so cookie cutter and so straightforward, or like that there's no real need to do a lot of testing or verification that this works. But I like to say that people, well, that's not just my saying, it's something, there's a very nice graph that I was shown years ago where as the system grows and yes, you scale up, the more time is taken away from just pure development to quality assurance, validation, testing, all these sorts of things that are more about making sure that the system as a whole continues working. Because this is the scary part, or rather this is the argument for unit testing, that you can make certain changes that have long-spanning effects into other parts of the system, and if you don't have unit testing or some way of validating that, you might actually fix something in one place and break something in another place. And that uncertainty, all this stuff, all the QA stuff, all this stuff that we do as software developers is mostly tied into that. The time you spend, it depends on the feature now, of course, but in many cases you find that the time spent on validating that the system is still working takes more time in some cases than the actual development itself. Not always, but it is a big factor, I've always found. So I'm not sure if I would call that the most time-consuming aspect, but at least for us software developers, if we just consider our job, if we talk overall, definitely planning, like planning, aligning, meetings, all that stuff takes more time than anything else. Holy shit, you have no idea how long it takes to, that's what, you know, all those politicians that you think never do anything, do you know what it takes to get something legislated or like anything like that? there's like 100 meetings and a million people in between you wanting something and something actually happening, because that's how many people are involved with opinions and thoughts, and then you have to make sure that everybody agrees. It's the same thing in software depending on the size of the company. I mean, if you work on a really, really small system, maybe a little monolith or something like that, then that does not take a lot of time. Then the coding is really the thing that takes the most amount of time. But for anything more serious, that is definitely the thing that takes the most amount of time. So what I want you to take away from this is that if we just consider anything that has to do with a software engineering project, aligning people, meetings and all this stuff, and planning out work and deciding what's actually going to happen and scope things and so forth and so on, the administrative stuff takes a lot of time. A lot of time. If you're lucky, you have like a very lean process, and some stuff can be very quick because it's sort of well defined, or you have a good understanding. But in large organizations, especially if you have something like one of the systems that I work on, which is high integration, where you have like a dependencies to a lot of other systems, that is it takes tons of time. Because you can't just go and fix the code yourself. You have to ask somebody else to fix it for you, and then they have to agree that this is important and prioritize that, blah 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 blah. It takes a lot of time. For software developers, the ratio is usually that small scale project, then the coding takes the longest, but as the system's complexity goes up, the validation and testing and quality assurance and all this stuff takes the most amount of time by far, because you can fix a small thing and still break a bunch of other stuff, and you always have to make sure that you didn't do that when you ship things. Have a great day.